The head of the FBI went before a Senate committee today to talk Homeland Security. But Director Christopher Wray ended up spending much of his time on a very different issue, namely his agency's handling of the investigation into then Supreme Court nominee Brett Kavanaugh's background after multiple women, as you know, came forward to accuse him of sexual assault. But it was an investigative process Wray fully defended.
Our supplemental update to the previous background investigation was limited in scope, and that is consistent with the standard process for such investigations going back quite a long ways.
As you likely recall, in addition to the accusations made by Christine Blasey Ford, Deborah Ramirez came forward to The New Yorker a few weeks ago with a somewhat graphic story about how she says during a drunken gathering at Yale, Kavanaugh exposed his penis and thrust it in her face, forcing her to touch it without consent as she pushed him away. In a story Ramirez's friend, Jennifer Klaus, said she found quite plausible and was ready to talk to the FBI about Kavanaugh's past behavior. They never reached out, nor did they speak to any of dozens of other potential witnesses, as Senator Kamala Harris pointed out at the hearing today.
Do you know who determined that the FBI would not interview Judge Kavanaugh or Dr. Ford or the list of 40-plus witnesses?
Again, I would say what I said at the beginning, which is, as is standard, the investigation was very specific in scope, limited in scope, and that is the usual process, and that my folks have assured me that the usual process was followed.
But was the usual process enough? Jennifer Klaus joins me now. Jennifer, it's good to meet you. Thank you for being here.
Hi.
How well did you know Debbie Ramirez?
Debbie was a year ahead of me, so I met her her sophomore year when I was a freshman. Mutual friends. I was very close with a good friend of hers that brought me over to Debbie. And there was probably a group of 8 of us, including Debbie, that hung up for a number of years.
You were pretty
at
close
school.
for a while there.
Oh, yeah. And I lived with her after school.
You have no firsthand knowledge, as you've said, of the incident that she is alleging happened. But you've said quite powerfully that you believe every word she said. Why?
Because Debbie's not a person that would lie. Ever. And in this situation, she's gaining nothing from this. I feel like this is devastating for her. And if I can be a strong point in her defense, I will be.
Kavanaugh, you did not know quite so well.
Correct.
But you observed, you saw him at parties, from what I understand, that
Yes,
sort of thing?
And talked to him.
You
Sure.
saw the term I think you used, correct me if I'm wrong, is that he was a sloppy drunk. Are those the words you used?
Yes.
What does that mean, a sloppy drunk?
Swaying on his feet. Appears to me drank to excess. Holding up the wall.
Did he seem to know what he was doing or where he was? I mean, what was his state as best you could tell?
Yeah, I think he knew where he was. Yeah.
He testified. Did you watch the hearings, by the
Yes,
way?
I did.
October 27th, part of his testimony was about his beer drinking.
Yes.
Here is now Associate Justice Kavanaugh at the hearing.
We drank beer, my friends and I, the boys and girls. Yes, we drank beer. I liked beer, still like beer. We drank beer. Sometimes probably had too many beers, and sometimes other people had too many beers.
Do you think that's a fair description of the what you call the sloppy drunk you saw at Yale?
I think he's downplaying that a bit.
Mm-hmm. Do you, when you first heard, I assume in the news, I'm
Yes.
guessing, that the President of the United States had nominated Judge Kavanaugh to be on the Supreme Court, what was your immediate reaction?
I laughed.
Why would you laugh?
Just knowing what Brett was like at college.
I mean, and what, was it just the drinking, or what else about him that?
Well, no, because I only knew Brett in a social atmosphere. So at parties, I was not friends with him, but I just laughed that it was in a small world that I knew somebody that was nominated, and just my memory of him and how he was, it just made me laugh.
How he was, meaning what?
At parties.
At parties.
Yeah.
You know, the FBI didn't reach out to you, is that correct?
Correct.
You didn't reach out to them either, though, to be candid here. When I read this, I had to read this twice. You weren't called by a staff member on the Senate Judiciary Committee. You were called by the chair of the committee, Chuck Grassley? One
of his representatives called first. I called back, we played phone tag, and then it was the senator that called me back.
And he did, Chuck Grassley himself, who also is the chair of the Republican chair of this committee.
Yes.
What questions did he ask you when the two of you spoke?
He asked me, like how I knew Debbie, and did Debbie drink to excess? Asked me about Brett.
What'd you say to that?
I said, at times, as we all did.
And she, by the way, in the New Yorker piece, she blames herself in part. She says, I drank too much. So she wasn't trying to hide that thing. It came out in the piece.
And I think a number of us, we all had times where we drank too much. And I don't think anyone had a problem with Brett's drinking. I think we have a problem with his recollection of it.
And what else did Senator Grassley ask you?
Asked me about, were there other men who exposed themselves at parties?
And what was your response to that?
Some of the name that they mentioned to me, I was unaware of that.
He suggested a specific person.
Right.
And you said you're unaware. Did you know other examples where men were exposing themselves at parties?
Not to the extent of what Debbie says.
And did he ask you anything else?
Also asked me if anybody had reached out to me regarding Debbie and Debbie's claims.
And what was the answer to that?
No.
Did you find it, the chair of the Senate Judiciary Committee is calling a woman who has a line or two in a New Yorker article who has no firsthand knowledge. What was your feeling?
I thought it was odd that he called me.
Where did you think he was going with these questions? Did Ramirez ever drink to excess? Were there other people who exposed themselves? Where did you think Senator Grassley was going with all this?
Well, as it was ending, my impression, and this is just what I believe, was that perhaps he was undermining Debbie's story, trying to maybe suggest that she said it was Brett and maybe it was somebody else.
Not unlike what Senator Collins said on Friday, saying, I believe, and I'm paraphrasing, I believe Professor Ford, but I just don't believe that her assaulter was Brett Kavanaugh. That's where you think that Chuck Grassley may have been going, that maybe something happened to your friend Ramirez, but it wasn't Brett Kavanaugh who did it. Is that where you thought it was going?
Perhaps, yes.
So have you spoken to Ramirez since? I know you've only intermittently talked through the years. Did you speak to her or communicate with her through this?
After the New Yorker article, since I was like one of the few that actually put my name to my quote, she reached out to thank me.
Email or?
Just an email, just very brief, thanking me for sticking up for her. And then over the last week to 10 days, there's been multiple articles and TV shows, etc. And she just sent me an email maybe a day ago, much longer one, again, just thanking me for being strong, being a champion for her cause, and that this has been very difficult for her, and she appreciates all of her friends that have stuck by her.
Do you regret considering the outcome, do you regret having stuck by her, to use those words?
Absolutely not. And I'm still sticking by her because I don't think it's over.
Do you think she did the right thing? Whoa, what do you mean you don't think it's over?
I just don't think it's over.
What does that mean?
I just think that the truth hasn't come out.
But you think it will?
Yes.
Jennifer, thank you very much for your candor. Appreciate your time.
Thank you.
Jennifer Klaus.